One day, on a Monday morning, I pulled into the doctor's parking lot. And next to me, a car parked, and it was an anesthesiologist on his way to do a case I had that morning, a back surgery case. And he said, "Did you see the young man with the gunshot wound to the brain?" I said, "No, I didn't hear anything about it yesterday. They would have called me." I said, "Maybe it was too bad to even call me." I said, "Where is he?" He said, "Well, he's up in the ICU, and they have those disposable paper towels wrapped around his head, and he's got a endotracheal tube, that's a breathing tube, but he's not hooked to a respirator anymore." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm always sorry to hear about that kind of a brain injury." But I said, "I've got a back case to do." And he said, "Well, I've got that case too." So we went to surgery, and after surgery, as soon as I left the operating room, my beeper went off for the intensive care unit. I said, "That's odd. I have no patient up there." And I said, "I wonder if it's this guy." So I called, and I said, "What's the patient's name?" He said, "Well, it's a young boy injury to the brain called Darryl Ueno. Could you see him? The mother has requested it." I said, "Sure, I'll do that." And I went to X-ray and pulled his file. And when I was in there, I put it up on the view box. The first film was a lumbar back scan, CAT scan. And it had my name, Dr. Turner. I said, "I wonder if I ordered this for this boy." I don't recall. The next one was the brain, and that looked kind of messy. Apparently a .357 Magnum had been used in a reported suicide attempt put up to the right side of the head, and it was really terrible with bullet fragments and bleeding. So I went up to the intensive care unit to see this young man, and as I parted the curtains to see, it was quite an amazing sight. I looked to the right, and there was this young man, his head wrapped in the disposable towels, just like the anesthesiologist described, a tube coming out of his throat, but not hooked to the usual respirator or anything, and a young lady crying at the bedside, and in front of me was a woman with her back to me. And as she turned around, I looked at her and I recognized her face. And I said, "Is this your son, Darryl?" She said, "Yes." She said, "You knew him from before, so I thought maybe you could just come and see him. We're waiting for him to take his last breath." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, when this happened yesterday, one day ago, his girlfriend heard this, and I said, "Well, can we talk outside?" We went outside the room. I said, "Tell me what happened." She said, "Well, she heard this explosion noise, and she came in and said that she found him laying in a pool of blood with the gun on the floor. And apparently he had been a little bit depressed about his business of installing car stereos." And I said, "Gee, I'm sorry to hear that." She said, "Yes, and when he came in, they said nothing can be done, and we should think about him as an organ donor. His liver, his kidneys, his heart, and perhaps his eyes." But he had told his girlfriend that he never wanted to be an organ donor, so I couldn't in full clear conscience do that, so I refused that. And they disconnected the respirator then, and they said, "Well, he'll take his last breath shortly," and I thought I'd call you just so you could see him. So at the view box outside, we're sitting down. I said, "I'm really sorry to hear this." And I put up the brain scan, and I said, "Look, but here's what's happened." I said, "With this injury to the right side of the brain, if he made it through this, he may never move his left arm or leg again." I said, "Would he want to live that way?" She said, "No, I don't think he'd want that." I said, "So I'm so sorry to tell you that." And she said, "But he responds to me." I said, "What do you mean he responds to you?" She said, "Well, he'll squeeze my hand." I said, "Wait a minute." I said, "That changes the whole picture." I said, "Wait a minute, let me go back and examine him carefully." So I went back to the room, and as I'm walking back, I'm thinking of an expression the Japanese say, "Sandame no shojiki," which means the third time is for real. I had seen this boy apparently for a strain of his back because the scan was normal some years ago. Then I remembered being in a stalled traffic line outside the local high school, seeing three boys argue with another guy who ran back in his car, and he grabbed a hammer, and he came back and he whopped one of those boys, and it turned out it was this boy, Darryl. And I saw them jump in a car and take off to the hospital, and I followed them, and I was able to talk to Darryl, and I said, "I saw the whole thing. Let me sew up the laceration. Listen, you have to be careful about this arguing and fighting. Look what happened." And now here I am looking at him for the third time. So I go up to the bedside, and if you try to stimulate him with pain, he doesn't move anything. He looks like he's essentially dead. And that's what they had thought. The injury was so bad. But I put 2 fingers into his hand, and I whispered in his ear, I said, "Darryl, squeeze my fingers." You couldn't see him perceptibly move, but I could feel him tighten up. And I said, "Now let go." Squeeze again. I could feel him tighten and let go. I said, I'll be back, Darryl. Called the mother eyesight. I said, listen, Darryl is wide awake. And he said, what? We were told he was. I said, look, the point is now he's wide awake. And I think with all these things involved, you know, it's 24 hours. I think I can fix things up and clean it up. But look, he's got to realize that he may never move that other left arm or leg. So let's give him the choice. She said, well, I don't know. I said, please, let me handle it. So I went back, I unwrapped his head, I looked at that wound, and there was brain material all over. It looked bad like they saw, and I cleaned it up, wrapped it. I said, no, Darryl, I'm whispering in his ear again. I said, let me teach you something. I want you to move one finger to answer me if the answer is yes. And then I could see, looking for it, I could see a little movement. I said, now 2 fingers for a no. And I could see that. I said, now look, Darryl, do you know who I am, Dr. Turner? And he said, yes. I said, all right, now look. Do you know that you're in Hilo Hospital? He said, yes. I said, do you know why? He said, no. So I explained what I knew. I said, now here's the point, Darryl. If you want to make it through this, we've got to move fast because you're set up for infection and other problems. We've got to move fast and I can fix this. But I want to know if you want to live. Now listen, you may never move your left arm or leg again. Do you understand that? He said, yes. I said, so tell me, do you want to live? And this boy moved 1 finger, and then he moved 1, 4, and 3. And the mother started crying, the girlfriend started crying, they hugged each other. I said, what is this? He said, well, that was their beeper code for I love you. I said, all right, let's go to work. So I wheeled him over to the operating room after I called, made the arrangements. And the anesthesiologist, my friend Dr. Guerin, was on call that day, and he had been the one that had put the tube in. He was also asked to disconnect the machine. That's all he knew. And he said, just what kind of prognosis did you give this family? I said, Steve, it's a long story, but let Darryl answer. I looked down at Darryl. I said, Darryl, open your eyes. He did. I said, do you have anything to tell Dr. Guerin? He said, 1, 4, 3. And Guerin knew that beeper code. So while I was operating, he was down in the, downstairs telling all the people about the boy who you thought was dead now. Turner's up there operating on him. And the key thing about this case is this. There's a picture in my book in which I'm sitting there after I cleaned everything up and passed it up, in which I'm letting this energy flow. Okada had said, if you have this Ohikari amulet, and I had researched the work, and I had been to their research institute where they technically try to show how this spiritual light works. For a half hour, I let this spiritual light flow. I could only do this in a place like Hilo, which is very spiritual, and plus they did everything they could to always make the patient better. And they had seen the results. I was able to do this. And later, 8 years from the day of surgery, Darryl came to see me. And when I said, Darryl, how's that arm now? And he said, well, Doc, I drove here and there's my new car, you can see that, and I can lift that arm okay. He said, I want to invite you to my wedding. He said, I'm getting married. I said, wow. I said, tell me about your experience, Darryl. And he said, well, I'll tell you these things you need to know. He said, first of all, years before that happened, I was with my cousin. We were out what we call holo holo, it means to have fun in Hawaiian, and we were driving on that saddle road between the mountains. And we looked off at all that rough lava rock and we said, hey, if we flew out and knocked unconscious and they thought we were dead, they may try to take out our kidneys. I said, oh, okay, I never want to be an organ donor. And he had this recurrent vision many more times before this happened. Fortunately, he told the girlfriend who told the mother, so they didn't consider him an organ donor. The second thing about this is that he told me on that morning, he was out of his body, in a spiritual body of some type, an astral body, at the window of that intensive care unit, watching me park the car and talking to the anesthesiologist. And he remembers hoping that somehow I would hear about him and come to help him. So this shows that the precognition, he had the warning, so he was able to say, I don't want to be an organ donor just in case they think I'm dead and I'm not. But it was his mother's caring also that saved his life when she said, but he responds to me.